A family moved into their dream home, and 18 months later, their bedroom floor was sloping so badly that a marble rolled clean across the room on its own. Nobody had touched the foundation. Nobody had flooded the basement. The problem was buried inside the walls the entire time, hiding in the one part of a house that almost nobody thinks to inspect: the framing, the wooden skeleton holding everything up. And by the time anyone noticed, the damage was already spreading room to room. If you like uncovering the hidden reasons homes fail long before anyone expects it, subscribe now, because every week this channel pulls back the walls of real houses to show you the construction mistakes that quietly cost homeowners thousands of dollars, and how to spot them before they spot you. To understand how a house can start failing from the inside, you have to understand what framing actually is. Long before the paint, the flooring, the countertops, or the light fixtures, every home starts as a skeleton of lumber. Studs, joists, beams, and rafters, nailed and braced together in a very specific order, are what carry the weight of the entire structure. The roof pushes down on the walls. The walls push down on the floor. The floor pushes down on the foundation. Every single piece of that skeleton has one job: to move that weight safely into the ground without bending, twisting, or breaking. When it's done right, a house can stand for 100 years. When it's done wrong, the mistakes stay hidden behind drywall, sometimes for years, quietly getting worse every single day. At first, nothing looks wrong. That's the unsettling part. A framing mistake rarely announces itself on day one. The walls are straight, the floors feel solid. The homeowners move in, hang their photos, throw their housewarming party, and have no idea that somewhere behind that fresh coat of paint, a critical structural detail was skipped, rushed, or built incorrectly. It can take months, sometimes years, before the first warning sign appears. The marble that rolled across that bedroom floor was actually the third sign, not the first. The first sign happened almost a year earlier, and the homeowners didn't even notice it. A hairline crack appeared near the top corner of a bedroom door frame. It was small, barely visible, the kind of thing most people blame on a house settling normally. And to be fair, some settling is completely normal in any home during its first year. But this crack kept growing, slowly, diagonally, reaching toward the ceiling like a spider web with a destination. Most homeowners never notice this detail, because a diagonal crack above a door or window is one of the most overlooked warning signs in residential construction. It doesn't look dangerous, it looks cosmetic. But when framing is undersized, misaligned, or missing critical support, the wood begins to flex under weight it was never designed to carry. And that flexing telegraphs itself straight through the drywall in the form of these small diagonal cracks. In this particular home, the culprit turned out to be something called a header, a horizontal beam placed above doors and windows to carry the weight of everything above the opening: the wall, the roof, sometimes even a second story. Think of it like a bridge built into the wall. Every time you cut a hole in a wall for a door or window, you remove wood that used to help hold up the house, so a header has to be strong enough to make up for what was lost. If a builder installs a header that's too small, made from the wrong material, or missing entirely, the wall around that opening doesn't have the support it needs. The wood above it begins to sag, ever so slightly, and that tiny sag is exactly what shows up as a diagonal crack. Here's where everything changed. As that undersized header slowly bent under the weight of the roof, it began pulling the surrounding studs out of alignment. Studs are the vertical 2x4s that make up the walls, spaced evenly, usually every 16 inches, standing straight up like soldiers in formation. When a header sags, it drags the studs on either side of it slightly inward, and that small shift ripples outward through the entire wall system. The floor joists connected to that wall start to twist. The subfloor above them starts to dip. And that, months later, is why a marble rolled across a bedroom floor that used to be perfectly level. What makes this kind of mistake so expensive isn't the header itself. It's everything the header touches. Fixing a header after the walls are finished means cutting open drywall, temporarily supporting the roof load with jacks and beams, removing the old header, sizing and installing a new one correctly, and then repairing the walls, ceiling, paint, and sometimes flooring all over again. A mistake that would have taken a professional builder 20 extra minutes to do correctly during construction can turn into a repair costing tens of thousands of dollars once the house is finished and lived in. But the biggest mistake hadn't even happened yet. As inspectors dug deeper into this home, they found the header problem was only the beginning. The real disaster was hiding 2 floors below, in the crawl space underneath the house. Down in the dark, damp crawl space, beams that were supposed to be evenly supported by concrete piers were instead resting directly on loose soil in several places. Over time, especially after heavy rain, that soil had begun to compress and shift beneath the weight of the house. As the ground moved, the beams above it moved too, sinking unevenly, inch by inch, in a process most homeowners never think about because they never go down there. This is called differential settlement, when different parts of a foundation sink at different rates, and it is one of the most damaging things that can happen to a home structure. Most people picture foundation problems as something dramatic, a giant crack splitting a concrete slab in half. But in reality, the danger is often silent and slow. A 1/4 inch of sinking here, 1/8 of an inch there, spread out unevenly across dozens of support points, and suddenly every wall, floor, and ceiling connected to that foundation is being pulled in slightly different directions. Doors that used to close smoothly start sticking. Windows that used to open easily start jamming. Tile floors develop tiny cracks in the grout lines. None of these things scream emergency on their own. Together, they're a house quietly being torn apart by inches. This hidden detail changes everything. When crews finally opened up the crawl space fully, they discovered the original builder had skipped a step that seems almost too simple to cause this much damage: proper compaction and support beneath the support beams. In professional construction, beams resting in a crawl space need solid, engineered support, whether that's concrete piers sunk deep enough to reach stable soil, or properly compacted footings designed to handle the load without shifting. Skipping that step to save time and money is like building a house on a foundation of sand and hoping gravity is patient. For a while, it is. Then, it isn't. Now comes the part that costs homeowners the most money. Once a structural problem starts in the framing, it rarely stays contained to one area. It spreads. The sagging header spreads stress to the studs. The studs spread stress to the floor joists. The floor joists spread stress to the subfloor. And the settling beams below made every one of those problems worse at the same time, pulling different parts of the house in different directions, like a slow-motion tug-of-war happening inside the walls. By the time homeowners notice the marble rolling across the floor, they're often looking at the finish line of a problem that started building itself years earlier. Compare that to a home built the right way, and the difference is staggering. In a properly framed house, headers are sized by the span of the opening and the load above it, calculated using standard span tables that professional builders and inspectors use to match lumber size to the weight it needs to carry. A small window might only need a modest header. A wide opening under a heavy roof load might need a much larger, engineered beam, sometimes made of laminated veneer lumber instead of standard framing lumber, because engineered wood resists bending and sagging far better than a regular 2x10. Underneath the house, support beams rest on properly sized concrete piers that extend down to stable soil, sometimes reinforced with steel, spaced at intervals calculated to prevent exactly the kind of sinking that destroyed this family's bedroom floor. The difference between these two approaches isn't visible from the street. Both houses can look identical from the outside. Same paint color, same landscaping, same welcoming front porch. The difference lives entirely inside the walls, inside the crawl space, inside decisions made by a builder when nobody but the framing crew was watching. That's what makes framing mistakes so uniquely dangerous. They're invisible until they're not, and by the time they become visible, they've usually been quietly getting worse for a long time. There was one critical mistake almost nobody noticed, and it's arguably the most common framing error in American homes. More common than bad headers, more common than poor foundation support. It's something called improper load path, and understanding it explains almost every structural failure story you'll ever hear about a house. Every part of a house that carries weight needs an unbroken path all the way down to the foundation. The roof rests on rafters. The rafters rest on the top of the walls. The walls rest on the floor framing. The floor framing rests on beams or foundation walls, and all of that finally rests on the ground itself. If even one link in that chain is missing, weakened, or misaligned, the weight above it has to find somewhere else to go, and it always finds somewhere, whether the house was designed for it or not. A shockingly common version of this mistake happens during remodeling, when homeowners, or even well-meaning contractors, remove a wall to open up a floor plan, without realizing that wall was helping carry weight from above. It might not look load-bearing. It might just look like an ordinary interior wall separating a kitchen from a living room. But if that wall happens to sit directly under a critical point in the roof or floor structure above, removing it without adding proper support underneath is like pulling one card out of the bottom of a house of cards and hoping the rest stays standing. At first, it doesn't seem like a serious problem. The wall comes down. The room feels amazing, open and bright, and everyone celebrates the beautiful new space. Weeks later, a crack appears in the ceiling. Months later, doors on the floor above start sticking. A year later, a professional inspector finds a beam upstairs sagging visibly because it lost the support it depended on. What started as a weekend renovation project turns into a structural repair involving temporary shoring, new engineered beams, and permits that should have been pulled before the sledgehammer ever touched that wall. This is exactly why professional builders and structural engineers treat every wall removal as a serious decision, not a cosmetic one. Before touching a single stud, they trace the load path from the roof all the way down to the foundation, identifying every wall, beam, and post along the way that's actually doing structural work versus the ones that are simply dividing rooms. If a load-bearing wall needs to come down, they don't just remove it, they replace its function first, installing a properly sized beam supported by posts that carry the load down to the foundation before the old wall ever gets touched. It's the difference between surgery performed with a plan and surgery performed with a hammer and good intentions. Another framing mistake that quietly wrecks homes across the country involves something most people have never even heard of: notching and drilling joists incorrectly. Floor joists, the horizontal beams that support your subfloor, are engineered to carry weight along their length, top to bottom. Sometimes, electricians and plumbers need to run wires or pipes through those joists, and building codes allow small holes and notches in very specific locations, sized within very specific limits. The problem happens when those limits get ignored. A joist with a notch cut too deep, or a hole drilled too close to the edge, loses a significant amount of its strength, sometimes as much as half. It might not fail immediately, Wood is forgiving, at first. But under the daily stress of foot traffic, furniture, appliances, and the constant flex of everyday life, a compromised joist slowly weakens further, sometimes cracking outright, sometimes just sagging enough to create that bouncy, springy feeling some people notice in older floors and dismiss as normal character. It isn't always character. Sometimes it's a structural cry for help. The professional solution is almost embarrassingly simple compared to the disaster of getting it wrong. Reinforcing a weakened joist with sister boards, additional lumber, or engineered material bolted alongside the damaged section can restore much of the lost strength. But that only works if the problem is caught early, before rot, moisture, or additional damage compounds the issue. Left unaddressed, over-notched joists are one of the most common reasons floors in older homes develop that unmistakable, soft, springy feeling that makes buyers nervous during a walkthrough and makes home inspectors reach for their notepads. Speaking of moisture, no conversation about framing failures is complete without talking about the silent partner in almost every structural disaster: water. Wood framing is remarkably strong when it's dry. It becomes remarkably weak when it isn't. And one of the most costly framing mistakes builders make has nothing to do with the size of a beam or the placement of a stud. It has to do with keeping water away from the wood in the first place. Flashing, the thin strips of water-resistant material installed around windows, doors, and roof lines, exists for one purpose: directing water away from the framing underneath. When flashing is installed incorrectly, missing entirely, or overlapped in the wrong direction, water finds its way behind the exterior siding and directly onto the wooden framing members hidden inside the wall. And here's the disturbing part. This kind of water intrusion can go completely unnoticed for years because the damage happens on the inside of the wall cavity, invisible from both outside and inside the house. Inside that dark, damp, hidden space, wood framing begins to absorb moisture it was never designed to handle. Over time, that moisture creates the perfect environment for wood rot and mold, both of which silently eat away at the structural strength of the framing, while the homeowner remains completely unaware, since nothing looks different from the rooms they actually live in. By the time a musty smell appears, or a soft spot shows up on an exterior wall, or worse, a section of siding starts to visibly bulge, the damage inside can be extensive, sometimes requiring entire sections of wall framing to be cut out and rebuilt from scratch. This is why professional builders take flashing details so seriously, layering materials in a specific overlapping sequence, almost like shingles on a roof, so that any water that gets past the exterior surface is guided downward and outward, away from the wood, rather than trapped inside where it can do damage silently for years. It's one of the least glamorous parts of construction, completely invisible once the siding goes up, and one of the most important details separating a house that lasts 50 years without issues from a house quietly rotting from the inside out. As investigators continued tracing the story of that original sagging bedroom floor, they found one more twist that surprised even the experienced structural engineer brought in to evaluate the home. The undersized header, the poorly supported beams in the crawl space, and a section of water-damaged framing near an upstairs window were not separate, unrelated problems. They were connected, each one making the others worse. The water damage near the window had softened the wood around a nearby stud. That weakened stud provided less support to the header above it. The already undersized header, now getting even less help from its surrounding studs, sagged even further than it would have on its own. And every bit of extra stress that created got transferred downward, through the floor framing, ultimately adding more pressure onto those unevenly settling beams in the crawl space below. It's a sobering reminder that framing problems rarely exist in isolation. A house is a connected system, not a pile of independent parts. A mistake in one corner of a home can quietly influence stress and movement in completely different rooms, sometimes on entirely different floors, because everything is tied together through that continuous, unbroken chain of structural support running from the roof all the way down to the ground. The good news, and there is good news, is that virtually every one of these mistakes is entirely preventable. None of them require exotic materials or impossible skill. They require attention to detail, proper training, and inspections that actually check the things that matter, instead of rushing through a checklist. A qualified framing crew that understands load paths, sizes headers correctly using proper span calculations, protects lumber from water with correctly installed flashing, and ensures beams rest on solid, engineered support rather than loose soil, builds a home that can comfortably outlast the people who built it. For homeowners and buyers, the lesson isn't to panic every time a door sticks or a floor creaks, because minor settling and normal wood movement happen in almost every home. The lesson is to pay attention to patterns. A single sticking door in humid weather is probably nothing. Multiple doors sticking at the same time, combined with diagonal cracks above windows, combined with a floor that feels noticeably uneven in one particular area. That pattern is worth having a professional look at, ideally sooner rather than later, while the fix is still simple, rather than after it's spread into something expensive and complicated. That family with the rolling marble eventually had their home repaired properly. Engineers designed a new header sized correctly for the load above it. Crews installed proper concrete piers beneath the crawl space beams, reaching down to stable soil instead of resting on loose fill. The water-damaged framing near the window was cut out entirely and replaced with dry, sound lumber, and new flashing was installed the correct way this time, layered and overlapped to send water where it belongs, away from the wood. The repair took weeks and cost far more than doing it right the first time ever would have. But the marble stopped rolling. The doors closed smoothly again. And somewhere behind their walls, for the first time since they moved in, the skeleton of their home was finally doing exactly what it was always supposed to do. Quietly, invisibly, holding everything up the way it should have from day one. If this pulled back the curtain on something you never thought to look for in your own home, come back for the next investigation, because there's always another hidden mistake waiting behind someone's walls. And next time, it might just save you from finding one behind your own.